right, well, we got Dan on the line.
And I started thinking, I probably shouldn't have shared those pictures.
All right, guys, we got Don Higgins on.
Anything that's got to do with chasing big deer, I've got my hands in it somehow. So,
well, my name's John Eberhart. The first one that comes to mind was early in my career.
I'm Scott Buckley from Iowa. I had jumped him in the summer too. He jumped up in that swamp grass down in the bottom lake.
And that's what I'm doing. I'm chasing it. There ain't nothing stopping me.
Justin Hollinsworth. I'm with Whitetail Addictions and Lone Wolf Custom Gear.
So what are we talking about tonight?
We're talking about the one that got away.
To talk about a deer that you didn't get it done on for some reason. So go ahead and get into the story of the one that got away.
All right, guys. Well, we got a very special guest for you tonight. How are you doing, John?
John is doing very well. How's Cody?
We're doing great. Appreciate you coming on, spending some time with us on this Thursday night. Really excited to hear your take on this story. I've heard you talk on many podcasts, watch you on the Exodus YouTube videos, multiple times. Love hearing your tactics and the way you know what you like to do, and that's the way you hunt, and I really like that about you. But just so the listeners can get an introduction of who you are, if for some reason they lived under a rock for the last 15 years and don't know who you are, go ahead and give them a quick introduction.
Well, my name's John Eberhart. I just turned 70, so I'm an old man now. But I still work out every single day that I'm home, so I stay in shape for climbing trees and hunting, and I bow hunted for 53 years. I've got 50 record book bucks, 31 from Michigan, 19 from out of state. I think I've been out of state on 24 hunts and took 19 Pope and Young bucks. And everything I do is public and knock on doors for free permission properties. I've never paid a dime to hunt any place. No relatives' property. I've never owned any property. So I think that's kind of unique. And I get offers all the time to go to hunt somebody's managed property or some pay-to-hunt ranch if I say something nice about it on Facebook or something. And, that's something it's hard to do because they're guaranteed kills, but I refuse to do that. And I feel like as soon as I kill a buck on a managed property or a pay-to-hunt anything, my credibility's gone because I preach public and knock on doors for free permission properties, and that's what I'm just sticking to for the rest of my life.
Yeah, mad respect for you for doing that. We've hunted public the last 3 years and got some kills off of it. Definitely a completely different creature out there, and definitely a lot harder. And we've been mostly knock on permission for the longest time, or either work for permission, but we just signed another lease this year because it's just so challenging to find a place to go. The excuses come out with us. We're like, man, homie has 2 kids, I have 3, and the value of time that you put in the woods, I'm not at the point where like you know the area, you can go in there and get it done the first week of season. I'm struggling on the 10th day of January. So I got to take the best opportunity I can, but I'm really excited to chit chat with you about the topic that we're going to talk about, and that is the one that got away. Like we mentioned, we wanted to have the best in the world, what we consider the best in the world killers that get it done. And I would say that you're up there, top of the list of hunting pressure deer, hunting public ground, and still getting it done, and doing it as long as you have. That's how you learn, is those mistakes. So I'm really excited to listen to what mistakes that you're going to give us tonight.
Well, one mistake that you just made is assuming that I just automatically get it done the first week of season. Because in Michigan is such a difficult state, and we have more bow hunters than any other state. Excuse me, I just swallowed the wrong direction. We have more bow hunters than any other state, and we're also a 2-buck state, so it's really tough. And the last 3 years in Michigan, hunting off season, I have not even seen a buck I would shoot or had a buck on camera that I would shoot. So 3.5-year-old and older bucks in the type of areas I hunt rarely ever exist. So it's really difficult. And again, for 3 years in a row, I haven't even seen one during the entire 3 seasons that I would shoot. But with that being said, the first one that comes to mind was early in my career. and it would have been in, I think it was 1977. And I was hunting on public land, and I was in a draw. And this was a draw that had been timbered off up on the side of this one ridge to the east and the side of the ridge to the west. And then down in the valley, there was just a little bit of a valley with tall weeds between these two areas of, by the year I'm talking about, those were probably had been cut over for 6 years. So they were 7-8 foot tall saplings that were just tight, dense saplings. You probably know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I had several does and fawns, and I think it was one 4-point come out of the saplings, and they came down into the bottom of the draw, and they were kind of funneling down through the bottom of the draw because it's the path of least resistance, heading out to some oaks down in some lower ground. And I'd had, I think, nine or 10 does and fawns, and that one subordinate buck go by me, and I'm talking they went by within 10 yards, so they were all, chip shots if I wanted to shoot them. And about an hour, 45 minutes before dark, the biggest buck that I had ever seen in the field, he came out of the saplings, and he cut the tracks of those does, and he's coming right down through there, and he gets about 35 yards away from me. He's on a route where he's going to come down the exact same route the other deer did at 10 yards. But at about 35 yards, he stopped. And it was a beautiful sunny day. It was late October, kind of getting into pre-rut. And he's coming down, and he just stopped. And he was about 35 yards. Back then, we didn't have rangefinders. We had these little dial rangefinders where you could kind of get a pretty close estimation. We didn't have laser rangefinders. And I had him at 35 yards, and I had a 35-yard pin on my bow. And I was pretty efficient at 35 yards back then because I shot in a lot of leagues. And he was standing there broadside, sun just shining on him, no wind. So wind wasn't a factor in me not taking that shot. And I'm like, okay, do I take this shot, which I know I can make, or do I just wait because he's down in the center of this draw? He's on the route where all these does and fawns had went by, so obviously that's where he's going to continue on when he starts moving again. So I chose not to take the shot. And probably 30 seconds went by. He's just standing there, and 30 seconds is quite a while. And he's just standing there. All of a sudden, he just took off and ran up the side of the ridge to the west. And when he did, I saw a flicker of a tail up there in the saplings, and the foliage was down by this point in time, but I did not see that doe up there. And so he had winded that doe, obviously because it was in the evening and the wind thermals were going downhill, so they were going down into the valley, and he just took off after her. And that was a moment in my career where I thought to myself, John, you probably should have taken, that was a good shot, a broadside shot, 35 yards. You shoot at 35 yards every day with a 35-yard pin. You could have made the shot, and you opted to wait for what would have been a better shot. And from that point on, whenever I got a shot opportunity that I felt was in my wheelhouse shooting range, I always took it, because during the rut phases, you can never bank on a deer doing what you think it's going to do. It typically will do, not typically, but quite often they will do something else because they cut the scent of a doe that maybe went through an hour or two earlier. And it was just one of those aha moments. And it was something at the time that it hit me hard because it was the biggest buck I ever would have shot. It was the biggest buck I ever saw in my life up to that point. And that stuck with me pretty good.
Yeah, that's a good story. Kind of hits hard home with us right now as we were talking this off season about, how many how many more deer have we would have shot if we were 10 yards more comfortable? You know, like our comfortable range was probably 40. Like we were really solid at 40. How many more deer could we have shot in perfect situations where they're out feeding or something at 50? And we got to putting the pieces together, and we realized that, you know, there's a pretty good chance adding 3 or 4 more bucks on our wall by adding 10 yards. So that's something that we got new bows this year, and we've really been trying to extend our range. And a lot of people are saying, well, I'm going to extend it to 70 or 80. I'm just trying to extend it 10 yards, you know, because I feel like that's the buffer. We always make a joke. We're really good at seeing them at 60, but that 20 yards is really hard for us to close the deal. So we're really trying to just be more confident, like in your situation. If you got a good broadside shot where you're comfortable, the deer's calm, you know, and you can make that shot, just having the confidence to shoot it, you know. And we kind of had the same thing happen to us last year where it wasn't perfect and we grunted at the deer. And we were kind of thinking, you know, maybe he would come closer, but we'd shot that far before and then kind of waiting. And that was probably the biggest deer you've ever seen in the wild, right? Kind of the same situation. It's just right on the edge of, man, do I want to shoot it? Do I not want to shoot it? And that deer we end up snort wheezing at that deer after we'd grunted and he put his head down, and he ended up running away, kind of just like your buck did. So that's definitely a good lesson. And when you're out there hunting, getting that opportunity is so challenging. And we were trying to add up last year how many legit opportunities we had at bucks. And it was 2. We had 2 opportunities at deer that we wanted to shoot for the whole season. So you waiting, like you said, 30 seconds for a better shot opportunity, that might be your only possibility that year to get it done. So that was definitely a good story to just take the opportunity when it presents itself if you're feeling good about it.
As long as you think it's ethical, as long as you feel very comfortable, you know, your odds are 80, 90% that you can make that shot, and there's no wind, you're not going to get any wind drift, and you got a good, you know, you're comfortable, and got a solid shooting position, and you got a pin for it. Yeah, absolutely take that shot, because in a pressured area, your odds of getting a second opportunity at a mature buck during a season is pretty skinny.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing. One you get one shot, you know, you get to see him one time, and then that's about it. That's about all you get. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, we had talked about shooting last year and going into a hunt with, you know, given the circumstances like John was talking about, you do have wind, you know, are you going to have wind drift and such of that thing. So I think every time we go out, we need to establish, okay, the conditions are this today. You know, a rain could come in or whatever and stuff changes, but I think we need to communicate about, okay, today I feel good at shooting 45 yards. You know, we can get it done at 45 yards or whatever that is. I think having that yardage established will help us communicate better in the tree and know when we're going to shoot.
You know, if you put in that circumstance of, well, you know, we said we're going to shoot 50, and the deer is at 50, you already know that you're shooting. You're not trying to decide in that moment.
Exactly.
Well, should I do it or not? You've already decided. You know,
I know as the hunter, you know as the camera guy, vice versa, and then everything from there should be
kosher. But definitely a story that hit home with us right there.
Yeah, my hunting level is, you know, typically I try to set all my locations up where I get 12 to 18 yard shots, and I don't think I've shot a deer over 25 yards in 20 years. I take that back. I shot at a deer at 35 yards in 2001. But other than that, it's been 20, 30 years probably since I shot a deer over 25 yards. And one thing I noticed that you guys said, when you snort wheezed, you visually could see that deer that you were snort wheezing to. Yeah,
we could visually see him. It's set up pretty good where there was a kind of like a 10-foot drop-off, slope-off into like a cattail marsh behind us. And we had grunted at him, stopped him. He was alert, looked over there for 10 seconds. Then he put his head down, took a bite of grass, scratched his ear, and I turned back towards that cattail marsh and snort wheezed. And then he, you know, ripped his head around there. would he stand there probably 20 seconds
Yeah.
and kind of scoped it out. And
he was debating on it.
Yeah, and didn't see anything and was like, I'm going to get out of here. And then he trotted maybe 15 yards and then started walking. So,
Yeah.
but that is the third big deer that I've snort wheezed at and scared. So I'm done doing that. It took 3 times for me to realize that, okay, these absolute giants do not like me to snort wheeze at them.
Typically what happens in that scenario is if you've got a deer and you can see it, typically it can see below the ground where you're hunting, or it can see the ground where you're hunting. So with a snort wheeze, that takes 2 or 3 seconds. There's a time frame involved there as opposed to a short, just a grunt maybe. And because that takes 2 to 3, 4 seconds to do a snort wheeze, that gives them time to lift their head, and then the vocalization continues. And if they're looking in your direction and they don't visually see something that's making that noise, a mature buck's not going to commit to coming to it.
Yeah, that's a good point. They have a lot more time to locate that noise. You know, a grunt's pretty.
Yeah, I had a scenario kind of similar to that where I had 2 bucks on a morning hunt, and they were heading back into a bedding area, and I didn't know they were bucks. I could just see their legs moving through the brush, and I took out my rattle bag. I didn't know they were bucks or does. So I couldn't see them, and they were not coming to me. So I just took out my bag, and I knew they couldn't see underneath my tree because there was a lot of brush underneath my area, because I was in heavy security cover, and I did a rattle sequence, and then all of a sudden they turned and they started coming toward me, and then they came out from underneath some trees, and I could see there was an 8 and a 10 point, and they came to about 40 yards, and they started eating acorns underneath this oak tree. This was like 8:30 in the morning, and then they lost. I'm sitting there waiting, and then they lost interest because I couldn't really make any noise, and they lost interest, and they started walking back in the direction they were headed originally, back towards where they were going to bed in the morning. And so I knew now they're close enough where I can't make a rattle sequence because that takes several seconds, and they would have turned their head and my noise would have kept going, and they would have picked me in the tree. They would have knew the sound came from a tree. So I took out my inhale grunt, because I carry an inhale and an exhale grunt call, and I took my inhale soft grunt out. I turned away from the deer, and I just did a real soft, short grunt call, and they both turned and walked right in at 12 yards, and I shot the 10 point. So, it's really important to know what call to make when you got a deer that possibly can see underneath your tree if you want to try and bring him in.
Yeah, that's a really good tip that I've never heard anybody say, because every scenario that I have snort wheezed at them and scared them, it's been I grunted at them first, they're kind of interested, and then I snort wheezed at them, and that's when they're like, okay. They're always like, okay, I'm getting out of here. Like, I'm moving fast 20 yards, and then I'm going to be chill. Like, they know something's not right. But that might be it. You're giving them that 3 seconds, 2.5 seconds to where they can find the sound and maybe pin you in the tree. Because I normally use my hands to cover my mouth a little bit also. So there is probably a little bit of movement.
They're not seeing your mouth make any movement on the call. They can just tell that the noise is coming from up in a tree if it's a 3 to 4 second noise as opposed to a half a second grunt.
Yeah, that's definitely a good tip, because I feel like that's probably what's happening. It's, they're like, there's nothing over there. I've already established that with the grunt, and now there's 3 seconds of something. And this, 2 of them were public land deer. So I was thinking, man, maybe they've been called out a bunch too. So, but when you have, the biggest deer on the ground that you pretty sure is the biggest deer out there, and you got him out there by himself, and it's the scenario laid out. It's really hard to just be like, okay, do I just let this deer walk by at 60, or do I throw a snort wheeze at him? And because I would have snort wheezed him in, I'd been a genius.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. If he'd have come crotting over there, I'd have been like, heck yeah, I'll snort wheezing every deer.
You got to try something. Absolutely. I can remember I had this buck at about 150 yards, and he wasn't a monster. It was a 130-inch 8 point on public land, and he was with a hot doe. And and they were walking away from me, and I was up like 35 feet in this tree, and this was in kind of a marshy area, and they were out in the marsh walking up towards this big ridge where there was crops, and it was getting kind of late in the evening, and they weren't going to get up there till after dark, but they were going through the heavy stuff, moving through the marsh, and I tried rattling because there was lots of cover between the buck and the doe and me, so there's no way he could have seen two bucks making any movements from where he was at, so I could get away with making that noise, and I'm far enough away where he would have to commit to come over and look. But he's with a hot doe, so he had no interest. He turned and looked, and then they went a few yards farther, and I did a grunt call, and finally I was like, I wonder if there's any chance I can bring in this doe. So I took out a fawn in distress call, which is basically for coyote hunting. and I did a fawn in distress call because I've actually called does in out of season, when they're fawning, just playing around, and they come running in. And as soon as I did that fawn in distress call, the doe came right over to the tree, 5 yards from the tree, and the buck was obviously with her, and I shot him. That was a really weird scenario. It's the only time I've ever done it, but it worked.
That's all that matters.
Yeah. What was it?
That
Two
was
years ago, we heard our first doe bleat, like a yearling doe bleat.
Yeah.
And I was like, that sounds just like the old long can back in the day. I was like, man, those guys had that thing nailed. We just didn't know it.
Yeah, you know where they got the idea for that can?
What's that?
Back in the 60s, they made dolls. They made dolls for little girls that when you tipped them upside down and you flipped them back over, they cried. And it was that can inside of the body of a doll. And
Genius.
It sounded just like a little doe bleat. And somebody must have got the idea to use that can and market it into the hunting. And Quaker
Someone
Boy
was probably like,
one.
hey, I'm going to have to take your baby doll out in the woods today, daughter. I'm sorry. I've been crushing bucks for years. I can't let this baby doll go.
The rut's almost over. I got to get it done.
I got to get it done. Be like,
yeah, Quaker Boy was the first one to market that, and then Primo's marketed it also, and then that Mike Beatty killed that world record buck in Ohio using that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, they sold a gazillion.
Oh, I had one of those when I first was hunting. I had one of those ripping it every 15 minutes out there. Meow. Meow. I'm like, oh yeah, they're coming. They're coming for sure.
A lot of hot does over here.
Yeah, a lot of does over here talking.
There's a lot of does over here. And they're all blend.
Yeah. That dad was like, all right, wife, we got to buy this baby doll every Christmas, so I got a crispy one come fall. I need it a little wore out, but I need it, by October she'll be prime to get that long bleat going.
My little sister was born in 1957. She had one.
Nice.
They came out in the late 50s or early 60s. I don't remember. But anyway, that was just a weird story. Another, my next one was one that was my most disappointing because I actually shot at this one and never even touched it. And this was in 1997. It was a monster. This was on private property. I had free permission to hunt it. And it was right next to an expressway, a major expressway, a major highway, a 2-lane on each side, north and southbound lanes. And it was straight up 12 o'clock, straight up noon, pre-rut. I think it was November 1st, October 31st or November 1st. It was going to be an all-day sit, and I was in a transition area between two bedding areas. They had a lot of security cover, and it kind of pinch-pointed down right there. So they kind of had to go through this pinch to get from one bedding area to the other because the expressway was on one side, and there was a lake on the other. And it's straight up 12 o'clock, and I knew there was a big buck in this area. I could tell by the sign. This is before cameras. So I knew there was a big buck, and straight up 12 o'clock, here the sucker comes. I can see him coming up the ridge out of this one bedding area heading south. And I had laid a tarsal. I used a real tarsal that I'd cut off another buck the year before and shrunk, and I froze it in a Ziploc baggie at the time. Now I shrink wrap them. And I had drug a tarsal through my shooting lane, which my shooting lane went over to the fence along the expressway. So I drug it from that fence to my tree, and I hung it in a tree 12 yards from the tree I was hunting in. And this buck came up. He came over close to the fence, which was probably 35 yards off of the highway. And again, this is straight up 12 o'clock. There's hundreds of cars going by. And but there was a little bit of brush between the highway fence and the actual highway, so cars couldn't actually see across the fence. And he cut that tarsal, and he walked right down that line just like a beagle on a rabbit. And he stuck his nose up on that tarsal gland in the tree that I hung it in a tree, and he was at 12 yards, sunny day, 40 degrees, no wind. I drew my bow, and I already had him hanging on the wall, and I shot right over his back. Never touched him. He was probably 160-inch 10-point. I wanted to kill myself.
We've been there. I lost a giant, and you're like, okay, I'm done hunting. The next 3 days, you're like, all right, I'm done for the year. I'm calling it. I'm looking for a tall cliff. First, I want to pitch my bow over, and then I'm jumping.
But that's the drive that keeps you going back, because it's bow hunting, and not everything is a perfect world, and shit happens, man, and that's what makes you keep going back. Is you just know it's difficult, especially when you're hunting, pressured public land and stuff like that. And I don't know, it's just kind of unique. Hey, I got a feel for you also, because when you said you had 3 little kids, when my kids were little, I actually almost quit hunting for 5 years. There was a 5-year period in the mid to late 80s that I didn't kill squat. I'd shoot some does for the freezer, but I totally gave up hunting for mature bucks because I was taking the kids hunting and stuff, and I just couldn't hunt the way I like to hunt because I was hunting with kids. And so I feel for you, man. I do feel for you.
That time's coming for us. We've already talked about that. I'm trying to buy some property, and we're trying to lock down some bigger leases, so when they're ready to go, we can kind of, get them set up, and then maybe we can rip a little bit of ourselves. But it's not looking good. I got 3 boys, so if they're all interested, I'm not shooting a deer for 10 years probably. But if one of them's in it, maybe I can make it happen. But
you need to get the 2 young ones set up on the Suburban piece.
Yeah, I got a real nice Suburban piece. It's real easy to access. That's the one. It's
okay.
It's like a private. It's a public, but it's only club members. So there's like 100 hunters out there. But I know they're safe because you can only have like 3 people per lot. So it's definitely, and they can hunt out there till they're 18 because I own property. So definitely a cool deal. So hopefully I can set them up and be like, all right, Dad's stand is right in here on this tree. Here's a map. Yeah. Go in there and kill a giant. All right, call me. I'm going over here where I know this big one lives.
Well, the upside of that is when your kids kill their first deer, you'll be more geeked probably than any deer you've ever shot.
Oh yeah. When my wife killed her first deer, I was jacked. She didn't even know what she had done, and I was super jacked, way more than her. Then her brother came out. I was more jacked than her brother, and everybody. I'm like, look at this thing, man.
You know why?
What's
you
that?
Want to know why? Because you probably did the majority of the work for her to kill that deer. And it's a lot harder prepping a location and have somebody that's probably an inferior hunter to yourself go in and make that kill, because that just means you had to set up everything perfectly for that person to get away with and make that kill.
Yeah, I had actually passed that buck twice, the same deer. And I was like, all right, this deer's going to be here. Either her other brother's going to kill it or she's going to kill it. One or the other. Because I'm like, he's right on the edge of something I want to kill, so I'll just let him be. And one day at like 11:30, after I'd been out there all day, it came in. And then the day she shot it, I sat all day in the blind. And then she come out after work with mott sticks and a drink, carried the mott sticks into the blind, ate them, and then killed that deer. I was like, oh, come on, man. I've been out here grinding.
Threw away all the stereotypes deer hunting.
Yeah.
Hasn't hunted since.
Yeah, no, hasn't hunted since. She hunted one other time. 1 year after that, she had the opportunity to kill some does, and she passed. And after that, we had kids, and she's took the reins on that and not hunted since. So,
if I shot a really solid ass buck like that, and I had moss sticks on the same hunt, I don't know how you just stopped going.
That's what I need to do. She has the deer that she killed when she killed that deer, she had a lucky pair of socks, and I wore those, and I killed my 190, and then I tried it on the hunt with me and you in the blind, and we seen like a 170. Right? I'm like, these socks, man, they're pink, pink Browning socks, and those socks got some magical voodoo stuff on them.
You still got them?
Oh yeah, I told my wife, I said, I cannot break these out until prime conditions, because one, I don't want to not see a deer and the voodoo's gone, and two, if it happens, it's because of the socks, not because anything I did.
Well, I know when we seen the 170, it was definitely because of socks.
Yeah, we ain't seen
no
nothing.
Reason to
I
see
wear
that
the
deer.
socks, boom, 170. I'm like, oh man, these socks are fire.
Oh my God, that's
Ain't been a deer out there for 2 weeks.
What state are you in? I never did ask you that.
Illinois, we're in West Central Illinois, but yeah, we
okay.
for like
Cody, who's your other guy that you got?
Oh, this is my co-host Tommy. You haven't got the opportunity to talk to him. He just kind of jumped right in, but yeah, this is he's not really a co-host. He's another host of the show. Been with me for the beginning first episode, so he's my
I gotcha.
He's my number guy and my data guy, and he's the workhorse, and then I'm like all right, let's do this. He's like, all right, I can make that happen.
Yeah, what do you think about this? I'm like, okay, this is gonna be some work.
Yeah. Wow. And then he makes it happen. We're a great team. I push him to do what I think we need to do. And he comes with some good ideas too. We're a good team, but we've been doing this, and it's been awesome to be able to talk to guys like you and get to hear these stories that and in other chances of us not having a podcast, we'd never get to hear these stories and relate it to stuff that we've done, and try to take it as some knowledge to next year you got one at 35 and he's slightly quartered two, but you're like, man, I can make that shot, and you take that opportunity. You never know 5 seconds from now if that deer, like you said, there's a doe, here comes another hunter coming in to set up. A lot of stuff can happen, and boom, that deer's gone.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Well, and that's the cool thing. When you mess up, that's one thing. Anytime you mess up or make a mistake, that's something you never, ever forget. There's hunts that I've forgotten kills, but you never forget when you screw up. And that's something because you don't forget it, you try never to make that mistake again. You always try to make it a learning experience.
Yeah, I write down my biggest screw-ups of the year, what I could consider my biggest screw-ups. We actually had a podcast of all of our screw-ups. Like, we were like, okay, this is every way that we screwed up last year that we think we could have done better, and I wrote it all down, and I'm going to try to remember that, and then if I back-to-back, screw something up like that, I'm like, okay. It takes me 3 times. It takes me 3 times of really being like, all right, this is like we jumped that buck on public. We're like, there's probably a buck bedded right there. That's a perfect spot. Boom, jumped him. We're like, oh my gosh, we knew that. We just said it 20 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And then boom, jumped him. And I'm like, wow, okay, perfect. We got to believe in ourselves out here.
We're walking up there to get like a better look at the spot that we think is going to be a good spot for a buck to bed, and we're 25 yards from it, and he pops up and runs right up this cliff.
Yeah, and we're like, we knew there was one there.
I was like,
if we would have just set up 20 yards back, real good chance we'd have killed that deer. We were like, let's get 20 yards closer and really check it out.
Let's get so close we'll bump in, and then we'll know for sure.
Yeah, then we'll know for sure. We'll just completely ruin the hunt, and then we'll know.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, we were right.
That's our style.
Oh, we're doing the bump and dump.
Yeah,
that's what we were doing.
We're not dumping anything. We're good at bumping them, but the dumping part we're having trouble with.
We're dumping hunts away. Yeah, we're the only thing we're doing.
Throwing time away in the stand, eating Starburst. That's the only thing we're killing out there.
Something else I think that's kind of cool that you should tell your audiences from time to time is to write. Anytime you make a kill, if it's on a decent buck, write a little article about it, and keep it on your computer. And it's kind of cool to go back and read those old. I've done that since the 70s. I've got articles on almost every buck I've shot of the last 100 bucks I shot, and it's kind of cool that you can go back and read them to correct, because things tend to, over the years, you throw more stuff in, make it sound like it was more difficult than it was, or vice versa. And when you go back and read it, you find out, what the wind direction was, what the circumstances were, what time of year it was it morning, evening, midday. I always think it's kind of cool to write a short article on each and every kill you make.
Yeah, that's something that we have talked about, and this year Cody actually got me a hunting log, so I'm pretty excited to get that out and going this year. And one thing that kind of has inspired us to keep a log like that is because one reason you mentioned is you forget some kills, or like the exact conditions, and two is like, so we have 5 kids between us, and in 40 years let's go 60 years. In 60 years when I'm long gone and my kids reading this hunting log or looking at a mount or something, they'll have a little piece of story to share with the grandkids, grandkids, and it'd be cool to hear Grandpa's story even though Grandpa's not here anymore. Yeah. So that's something that's kind of we're really going to get into here, I think, in the next year or two for sure.
Yep. And having a logbook's a little different than writing an actual article about it, because in an article you can usually add more details about
how it actually went.
With the foliage down, and everything you did, your entry route, your exit route, and I don't know. It just seems like when you write an article, and like when I'll write an article after I make a kill within a couple of days. And then for every day for the next week, I'll go back and I'll think of something else I did, and I'll add it to that. And then after about a week's done, I've pretty much got it secure, and I'll put it to bed. And I go reference those articles, And a lot of the articles I've written for magazines, I've just expanded on them and added a little bit more fluff to them and put them in magazines. And it's kind of cool. And you never know where you're going to end up. You may be a writer someday.
Yeah.
Yep. You never know. That's definitely cool. You can definitely put some pieces together. I was thinking about hunts just on the ones that I've been successful, and sometimes it's close to the same date or you're close to the same scenario, and then you get like a curveball that's just like off the wall, a random kill that you get, and you're like, I got to jot this down because if this happens again, people say lightning don't strike twice, but I think when hunting, if you're hunting the same property for a long time, I think lightning can strike 3, 4, 5 times in the same spot. If you got the same.
Oh, I 100% agree with that.
We always like to say if there's big bucks in there, there's a reason they're there. There's a reason they like it, and if nothing greatly alters, like pressure or someone comes in there and wipes out a bunch of young deer or something, there's going to be big deer in there. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
There's a reason that they were there at the time that they were there, and more than likely they're going to be there again. And that's how we're going to hunt pretty much all this year. Just past data where we've seen deer. Rely less on trail cams and just kind of go where we're like, well, last year around this time, there's a lot of buck sign over here. We've seen a couple good bucks over here. We're going to go hunt over here. Like that's why we're going to do it. And, I'm excited because it's going to be less stressful than trying to crunch all the data and run the numbers. And the wind's doing this. We probably should curve around and come in. Like you're like, oh man, we got 9 plans trying to come up with one, and we ain't got nothing.
That's one thing when you own a property for an extended period of years. Yeah, you do find a lot of stuff that happens time after time after time. And when the dominant buck is killed in a specific area, he's there because of the security cover. There's obviously some sort of food, and there's it's an area where he can probably breed securely during daylight hours. So there's lots of reasons a dominant buck is where he's at, and if he gets killed, usually within a year or two, the next dominant buck is taking his place. It's just like fishing. I used to fish in a lot of bass tournaments and even pike. And when you catch a bass, and if you kill it or you catch a big pike in an area and it's weedy and it's got a lot of forage fish, if it's a 40-plus inch pike and you ended up killing it and eating it, a couple weeks later there'll be another one in that area because it is an area that's the next dominant pike in the area will take that over because he's probably fought the others to keep them out of there, and that's his territory. Once he's gone, they'll find out he's gone, and somebody else will take it over.
Yep.
Fish and everything's kind of like that.
Chancey said the same thing.
Yeah.
Fish and big bucks are a lot alike.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know jack about bass fishing.
No,
That's probably
I'm
why.
squat.
That's why I'm not killing as many deer as I'd like. I need to start bass fishing more.
But bass fishing's weird. You can go out bass fishing and you can catch your limit of bass, and if you catch a couple under a dock, after weighing, you weigh in maybe a quarter of a mile, a half a mile from where you caught the fish, you dump it in the lake. 3 or 4 days later, you catch the same fish under the same dock.
Crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. But anyway, we're way off topic.
That's normally how our show goes. Yeah.
Nothing new here.
Yeah, nothing new. It's normally like a little bit of solid content, mostly jokes and way off topic talk, but it's fun. Well, we probably got time for one more quick, the one that got away. Do you have another buck that you're thinking of? Just a quick story, and then we'll let you go on with your week.
Yes, I do. This one actually happened out of state. This one happened in Iowa, and it was probably a 180-incher, which my biggest buck's 180, so you got me if you got a 190. But I was hunting in Iowa, and I was up in a tree, and it was in an area, it was in a draw. I take it back, it was in Kansas. It was in Kansas, and I was in a draw, and a lot of the draws out there have a lot of hemp weed. I don't know if you guys are, marijuana, old junky marijuana, and those marijuana weeds will grow up, 4 or 5 feet tall. And then there was other weeds scattered within it. And so I'm up in this tree, and there's a little dry creek bed, probably 30 yards to my north. And I was in a scrape area. So there's a bunch of scrapes all around me, which is really common in Kansas. There's scrapes everywhere. I got, and because I'm in a draw up on the side of each one of the hills, it goes up into a big crop field to the east and to the west. And I had this monster buck coming through this hemp to the north of me, and he was kind of circling, and he was coming down, and he was coming towards me. And these weeds were so tall, I could just see his head and his antlers off his head. And all of a sudden, he turned, and he started coming in my direction, and he's probably 50 yards. So I'm in my sling or saddle, and I swing around the tree to position myself and picked up my bow, and without knowing it, there was a doe right there where the creek bed ran east and west, and it was, again, 30 yards to my north, and this buck was 20 yards behind the north of the creek bed. There was a doe that he was following, which I had not seen because the weeds were too tall, and she was standing on the edge of that creek bed, just standing right on the edge before she would go down into it, come back up, and then come my direction. And so when he stopped and I made that movement, she saw me up in the tree because the foliage was down, and she just flicked her tail, and she didn't run off, but she turned around, went back up into the hemp, and then turned and kind of went northwest, and he followed her. So that was a time I never got a shot, but it was something where, because I wasn't attentive enough to notice he was following a doe, she picked me and took him with her. So that wasn't really a miss, and I don't really think if I would have had it to do over, I would have done anything different because I just couldn't see her in the weeds, but it was still a time that I didn't get a kill.
Yeah.
Where I felt like I should have.
We've noticed that. It seems like the does on public land are just savages.
Ninjas.
Yeah, they're just picking us off left and right, and we'll have a 3 or 4 year old buck, and doesn't really seem to be near as adept as a doe. We had a doe pick us up like 150 yards one time. It was incredible. Yeah. We're like, oh, there's a doe, and we turn our head, and she's already got us pegged. We're like, what is going on? These things
You're like, oh, there's a doe, and she's like, oh, there's two guys.
Yeah, there's two guys up there, out there. I'm not getting anywhere close to them guys. Those guys are a joke over
hey,
there.
let me blow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Even though I can't smell them.
Yeah. Can't smell them. I'm going to blow about 87 times.
There is no doubt if a buck's coming in behind a hot doe, the hot doe's the one you got to fool. No doubt about it.
She's on pins and needles. She's like, this guy behind me's trying to get me. These guys up here is trying to get. I just want to eat some acorns, man. Give me a second here.
Well, we just heard the story about the ditchweed buck.
Yeah, the ditchweed buck. Heck yeah. I know that when Paul was out in Nebraska, he was like, man, there's weed all over the place out here.
Oh, my God. Another time, and this one wasn't really a mistake, but I did a podcast with those guys that come to your house, Exodus.
Yeah.
Exodus cameras. And it was pretty cool, but we looked at a bunch of pictures in my basement because I keep all my deer heads in a sporting goods store, and one of the deer in the pictures was actually a set of 10-point antlers, and I was holding the antlers on top of a 3D deer target, one of those Delta. What's that big whitetail target? Delta. It's made by Delta, I think, from Mackenzie. Anyway, so I'm just holding the antlers up there like it's on top of this deer, and I had several people after they posted that YouTube video say, give me shit about, well, that wasn't a real deer, those antlers were real, but that wasn't a real deer. And I'm like, oh my God. And it was a deer that I had shot, and I'm sure you guys know somebody or have done this exact same thing. You questionably hit a deer. You think you might have shot it too far back and shot it in the liver or the guts, and you leave it overnight, and then the coyotes get it.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's what happened. So I tagged the deer, and then I cut the head off, and when I brought it back, I just, cut the antlers off, and just for shits and grins, I held it up over top of that deer target and took a picture, and I had people actually question that. Somebody's always looking for something negative.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. If they can ride your ass, they're going to find a way to do it. That's for sure. But.
Oh, my God.
Well, we really enjoyed talking to you tonight, John, and you giving us, an hour of your time tonight. This has been an awesome podcast, and I know our listeners are going to enjoy it, so we appreciate you coming on.